Hey, welcome to the Outward Conversation podcast. Today we have Chip McGee with us. Chip is a pastor of Christ Church in Statesville, North Carolina, and he was my pastor for a few years when I helped with the youth group there and played on the worship team at the church. And the way that Chip shepherds people has always stood out to me, and that's why I asked him to be on here today. Thanks for joining us, Chip.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Enjoyed
Yeah.
the podcast and it's an honor to be on it.
Well, thanks, man. Thank you for taking time to listen to it. Um, yeah, so to start us off, take us on a quick journey through your story and how you ended up pastoring at Christ Church.
Sure. So I just turned 40 this year, so I'm going to go way back.
Let's do it.
But so I'm going to go way back, and I was thinking through my childhood, and to make things brief, my mom drugged me to church. Never quite understood the church, and I remember saying things that I never should have said to my mom on the way to church because she would make me go in the mornings, and it was a Baptist church and had a pew hopping pastor who was very excited all the time. And I like to tell people, just being straight up real, is that I think he scared the hell out of me because we preached about hell quite a bit.
Yes.
And I remember running down to the altar and saying, "I don't want that." And one of the deacons introducing me to Jesus, the thing I did want. I'd say genuine conversion came actually through baptism. I didn't want to do it. I was embarrassed to go in front of people and do it. But as I went into the water, I realized that love never fails. It's not fear that will sustain you. And love of God washed over me. I heard God speak in the waters and say, "I set you apart, that you're mine." So,
How old were you then?
I was in middle school. That's why I was afraid of what people would think about me.
For sure.
Right?
That makes sense.
Kind of matches, yeah. And so I was afraid of what people would think about me, and then I bawled when I heard God's voice in the midst of it, not fully understanding what it meant. But I tried to walk it out best I could. Got involved in several Christian ministries in high school and college. It kind of sustained me from going crazy, really. Pretty immature in my faith, but trying. And I'd say in college, being shepherded by an InterVarsity staff member, which is a kind of a group in college, and really began to speak over me and really encouraged me to connect to the local church. And meeting Lindsay, it was just a good thing he did as a good boyfriend and a good Christian. Mm-hmm. So we started trying out churches in the Raleigh area. I went to NC State. And I remember I've thought back on this quite a bit because I agree with Martin Luther. He says that we're converted to three things. So first of all, we're converted to Christ, but then we're converted to his church, and we're also converted to his mission. So there's a surrendering and a giving up. And at this church in Raleigh, I witnessed a couple that mentored me and Lindsay when we were preparing to be married.
Yeah.
We helped lead worship, and seeing God's people set on fire and seeing life change. I drove the church van to get people to church, and then began to see people that I knew and helped get to church being baptized. I kind of got it. That's where my conversion to community, not trying to do this thing as a lone ranger. That's where it kind of came to fruition. And then we fast forward a couple of years, we moved back to Hickory, North Carolina, where Christ Church is, and we're two high school math teachers. So fun people, I like to tell everyone. Lindsay and I talk about calculus over dinner. It's wonderful. But but we came to Christ Church because we knew two people whose lives were impacted there, so we thought we'd try it out. I feel like soon after leading a life group, began to see fruit there, and Christ Church took a chance on me and hired me as a life group pastor, overseeing life groups everywhere. And if we kind of fast forward a little bit, while on staff, when you're on a Christian on staff, you're supposed to have it all together. Isn't that
Yeah.
kind of the rule, Josh? I think that's the rule.
Yes.
But, well, I was a wreck. I started having anxiety attacks, just completely broken, wondering if I would ever like function again, like, drive a car, shower, those kind of things.
Yes.
Um, and just totally didn't have it together. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, hi, my name is Chip and I'm a mess. And I'm on church staff, but I'm a mess,
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
through counseling, tried medicine, but it was horrible. And the most powerful thing that I did was actually lean on my conversion to Christ and the promises of God, but also my conversion to community. And I began to share while I was in the midst of it. Instead of keeping it in the dark, I brought it into the light.
Yeah.
And during this long battle, desperate prayers, I wish I could tell you maybe a little bit more, but I heard God tell me to pursue, and I didn't know what it was, but this opportunity presented itself, which made no sense at all. And it was to enroll in this Masters of Missional Leadership program in Seattle. So 1 year, 9 cross-country flights while having anxiety attacks, a lot of work, a lot of money that we didn't have. We just had our second child. He was a baby at the time, sleeping on some guy's couch out there when I arrived. But my wife and God, they just said go. So I went. And this is where I feel like a lot of the third conversion that Martin Luther talks about came about, because I felt like set on fire for mission. Like, I'll go wherever you say go. So much so that, Lindsay and I, even with a young family and had our first home and everything's like cozy, and we were, I brought her out to Seattle, the most unchurched city in America, and seeing God work there. And we put our house on the market and said, God, send us where you want to send us, thinking he'd send us who knows where. But anyways, I got a call to pastor Christ Church, so he sent us to Statesville, the booming metropolis of Statesville.
Nice.
But I've been here 7 years now. I know precisely it's where God has called me to be, where God has planted me. It's been rewarding. It's been painful. It's been, routine at times, and then a pandemic hits and nothing is normal again. A lot of my greatest joys have been here, and as well as some scars.
For sure.
Because that's a part of community. But that's basically how I got here as far as being a pastor at Christ Church.
That's awesome. And yeah, as you hit on, like, it's definitely hard to be in a leadership role and not know what to do with anxiety or depression or panic. Kind of that feeling that you don't really have anyone to talk to. And that's something that I hope we have time to come back to before this is over. But I want to bring up one thing that when I was going to Christ Church stood out to me so much. There's a coffee shop in the area that is closed now.
It's a shame.
Such a shame. But it was like, anytime that you go to this coffee shop, you're going to know someone else there. As far as somebody else who works in a church or a pastor, it was kind of like where all the different pastors would just meet up. So anytime I was like, I need encouragement, I would just go to this coffee shop and just find somebody. You would be there a lot, or many other local pastors or people would just be there. That would be great to talk to.
Yeah,
I remember
coffee. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Or an office. Yeah.
Whether me and you planned to meet here this day or we just did and started talking, I don't remember. But me and you were talking there, and I don't know what started this. So if you have any insight on that, I don't know what we were talking about before you said this, but you told me that you could tell by the calling that I had on my life that I wouldn't be at Christ Church forever, and that you wanted to know how you could pour into me during the time that I was there. And I just remember thinking, I don't even know how I answered you at that time, but I just remember thinking every time I think back on that is that, most people that I talk to now, and even some of my own church background, it's like that's not the way pastors treated the people in the church. It was doing and saying whatever they could do to get someone to stay in the church, other than, being honest and being like, hey, your calling's probably not going to take place here, but what can I do to help prepare you for what God has for you next? And I just wanted to give you a chance to kind of dive into, I guess, your mindset and your heart in the way that you shepherd the people in your church, and the way that you choose to lead them without, I guess, making them feel stuck, or at least that's the way that I saw it. Like, I didn't feel like whenever I took the job at the church that I'm at now, I didn't feel like me telling you that was going to be an awkward thing. I kind of felt like it was like, hey, like, this is something that we can like celebrate, is that I'm doing the thing that we talked about doing, and not, so I'm probably not going to be playing on the praise team anymore.
Right.
Like, it's not awkward. It was kind of like Chip understands, and like, this is what Chip knew was going to happen.
Right. Yeah. Doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt any less,
Yeah,
because
for sure.
you're a stud, man. Yeah.
I didn't mean for me.
We haven't had a better looking bass player since, if we're being real. I hope you're not watching this, but FYI, just so you know, I've got Mountain
Ooh,
View's t-shirt on.
very nice.
Yeah, it was
Which,
actually by accident, but I was like, oh man.
for
But
those who may not know, Mountains in the Seas was the worship band I was in, and I think most of us in Mountains in the Seas became like the praise team at Christchurch. At least four of us, and Eli was like Christchurch's worship leader.
yeah,
So yeah.
yeah. Well, so just kind of surveying people. I'm really not joking and being serious when I say this, but Josh, you're like a unicorn in a lot of ways, and I mean that in that, like, you're a young guy, and obviously we're looking back, so even younger than now, and sold out for Christ, doing ministry no matter what it takes, serving people, leading people, and easy reactions for pastors. And I'm imperfect. I totally have to fight these things. But some easy reactions for pastors is to feel threatened when someone is just sold out and fruitful. Is to take like a King Saul approach,
Yeah.
where you're just like, all right, I'm going to kill him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to get rid of him.
Yeah.
Because I need to be the one everybody's looking at. I need to
Yes.
be number one in this church. And so it's easy for pastors to feel threatened. And another thing that happens is that it's easy to feel ambition. Philippians 2, it talks about you put away vain conceit, where you push other people down, like when you feel threatened. And you also put away selfish ambition, where you use people to build your ministry up, to build your profile up, to brag about.
Yeah.
To like, and we see this, and it's difficult. I don't think churches necessarily make people burn out, even though we see burnout, because you're an individual, with a choice. So, but there are leaders who will burn you out in a hot second,
For sure.
so that they can look good doing it. And I guess what's impacted me over time is experiencing mentoring and shepherding. I call it shepherd leadership. It's like the most common term used in connection to leadership throughout the entire scriptures.
Yeah.
It's shepherding. That's how we learn how to lead within God's flock. So I've experienced that, older, younger, people coming alongside of me and lifting my hand in the air when I have some sort of success, or some sort of fruit that comes from my life. And somebody that does that has to be comfortable in who they are in the Lord. We've got to be comfortable saying, I see, I wish Saul would have said this. I see the king in you,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I
Like how
see,
powerful would that have been?
yeah.
Yeah. That's good.
But comfortable enough to say, like, I see the king in you. And I'm going to do everything I can to call that out of you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to publicly lift my hand up with your hand, and I'm going to celebrate everything about you. I've had people do that
Yeah.
in my life, and I do that tremendously imperfectly. Like, I overlook the king in many people, and it comes from being a part of a church. And this is something you need to know about the dynamic within a local church. A pastor, like sociologically, a pastor cannot handle it
Yeah.
above 50 or 60 people.
Yeah.
Like he or she cannot be a shepherd,
Yeah.
really, to every individual. And so I know there have been folks through the cracks. I know, like I've struggled, and I've failed in a lot of ways in this. But here's this is something I wish I meant to look it up. I wish I could remember this book of shepherd leadership I pulled this from. I might share it with you later, Josh.
Okay.
But these 4 words have always stuck out with me when it comes to leading people in the church, and it's know, feed, lead, and protect. It's I think it's Tim Whitmer, I think was his name, but I can't remember the name of the book. But to know, feed, lead, and protect. That's so easy for me to remember. It's stuck with me for over a decade now.
That's good.
That I need to know. Like, I need to know the flock. Like, I need to inspect them. Like, I need to be like the heart of Jesus, where he says, the sheep, they hear my voice, I know them, and then they follow.
Yeah.
So who's God made you to be? What's he called you to? Listen to him, pray for him, ask God for insight, watch him serve, watch him lead, just know him, and then feed is, I think of Ezekiel 34. It's one of my favorite Old Testament scriptures because it reveals God's heart. But my servant David, who will feed them and be a shepherd to them. So feed them is like pouring in affirmation, pouring in encouragement, speaking words of knowledge, pouring in God's word, sharing good books, it's like feeding them. Leading is, think of Psalm 23. So, Lord's my shepherd. I have all that I need. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He leads me to green pastures. He leads me along the right paths. So there's a sense of mentoring and guiding and leading, and then protecting. The shepherd has a rod too.
Yeah.
And I try not to whack people with it too much, but there's a rod, but it comforts and protects the sheep because they know, Jesus says, I'll lay my life down for the sheep like a good shepherd. And I'm not a hireling who's going to use you, but I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to protect you from wolves and false teachings. And so I do believe there's shepherds out there in the church, a lot of imperfect shepherds out there, all over the place, that I do think that when you find a true shepherd who has that kind of heart, they're not calling attention to themselves.
Yeah.
So, they're out there. They're kind of off the beaten path, laying under the stars at night, doing the unseen, difficult things, and they're out there. But man, I appreciate that moment meant a lot to you. I do think it was more kind of impromptu. You know what I mean? It's funny when God brings questions to your mind. A lot of the most profound things Jesus did was ask questions. And so it's interesting when the Spirit just kind of brings a question and it bubbles up, and it's precisely what somebody needs when they need it.
Yeah. And it's cool that that question that you asked taught me a lot about handling people and like how to deal with people. And like I said, I have no clue how I answered that question. I have no clue what we were talking about before that. I don't feel like anything else in that whole talk probably stood out to me, but that question. But I've used that question for multiple things, whether it's our church or people that I meet while touring with Outward Stuff, like just the idea that like although we may not be doing ministry together, as far as partnering up, we're still doing ministry together. And like, how can we help each other and not feel like competition? Because that's one of the things that I think is insane, when you can't get churches to work together because there's that sense of competition. Pastor Gene called it sheep swapping. He said pastors were scared of that. And just like that idea of like, we're not trying to like take people from your church if we ask to like do a community event together, but like, I don't know, it's hard to get churches to like see that, or it's hard to get some churches to like see that and like want to partner with that, because they're so scared of just hanging on to what's in their building that they don't want to let go of any of that. So it's cool to see, like, I don't know, it just really encouraged me to see a pastor that was, just very open to partnering with other ministries and encouraging other churches, and not, as you talked about with King Saul, not trying to tear down the competition, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of questions, a question that this is in my own personal time. I hadn't really shared this with a lot of people, but it's, when's the last time you've attended a ministry opportunity or outreach or whatever event that you didn't organize?
Yeah.
And because it's not malicious and not often out of competition, although that can certainly be creeping up in your flesh.
Yep.
But it's like a lot of times it's just you're like straight up busy in your bubble.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
but have that question kind of shatter your bubble occasionally is a healthy thing. When have you humbly attended something you didn't come up with or organize, or
yeah.
you know what I mean?
And then when you're there, not having the, oh, I could do this better. Like,
Yeah. Right.
Same thing with if you play music and you go to a concert. Sometimes it's hard to just enjoy the concert because you're breaking apart every detail about how either you're thought of, man, they're so much better than me, or man, I could do this way better than them.
Right.
It's hard to not do that in like a church atmosphere as well, and not go in and like pick it apart and think like, what would I do, other than just going in and asking God, like, well, what are you speaking to me through this? And like you said, just being humble and letting our arrogance go.
There it is.
So when I used to listen to you preach twice a week, every week, you said a lot, and I might destroy this quote, so feel free to correct me when I'm done. But you said something along the lines of, the local church is God's plan to reach the world, and there is no plan B. Might not have been those exact words, but something along those lines. I'm just curious to hear more of your thought on like the calling of the local church and why it's so important to be involved in one.
Yeah, I appreciate you answering. And yeah, that's pretty much the quote. And there's a lot of, maybe even among our listeners right now, there's a lot of yeah buts, that kind of creep up when you say something, that definitive, like it's almost controversial. And we can get into like there's the institutional church, and then there's the church. Everybody's like, the church is the people. Everybody's been saying that during the pandemic, and it's absolutely true. But I think the way we understand church in 21st century America is radically different than the ethos of the scriptures.
Yeah.
And we want to be, so we say the church, we say, well, I am an island unto my own, and unless on my terms, it's not that way. And I'm going to be radically individual. I'll be sold out to Christ, and therefore I'm part of the church. And so there's kind of different understandings when you hear that.
Yeah.
But Karl Barth, I pulled this quote because I've always liked it, but he says that the church exists to set up in the world a new and visible sign, which is radically dissimilar to the world's own manner and which contradicts it in a way which is full of promise. So so it's visible, like there's a visible sign in the world. It's really kind of the heart of God. I want to rescue my people from slavery,
Yeah.
so they can worship me on this mountain. And and he gave, you know, the commandments on the mountain. He set up a people, and this people is like a signpost to the world, is fulfill the promise of Abraham, right? Like, I'm going to bless the world through this people. They're going to be a sign that contradicts the rest of the world, but does so in a way where it gives a promise of God. And that's been God's plan from the beginning. You know, like you look at
Yeah.
Adam and Eve, right? Be fruitful and multiply. Why? So you can build a family. Why do you need to build a family? To tend to God's world, to operate with God's authority in God's world. So, you know, be fruitful, multiply. Abraham, you know, through your family, I'm going to make a people. I'm going to make a family that is going to bless all the nations. We see, you know, in the Old Testament, they had they ended up with a nation state, and it failed. They did not stand apart. You know,
Yeah.
they forgot the poor and they forgot the vulnerable, and God said, "Your worship stinks to me."
Yep.
And they ripped away to Babylon. But even then, the prophets are speaking of a last day when the Spirit is poured out, not just on a specific individual for a specific purpose, but the Spirit's poured out on all people, sons and daughters, young and
Yeah.
old. And they're speaking of that day. So we see Jesus's heart in John 17. Incredible, right? Like he's dying, and this is his prayer, and he's like, "Make them one."
Yeah.
You know, not a collection of individuals, but like make them one, so that they can know that you and I, my Father, are one. They can see the Trinity, like the fullness of God, like the
Yeah.
Godhead, by their oneness. Um, and then when the Spirit's poured out, and the church is birthed in Acts, once again, it's poured out on a diverse people who would never get along if
Yeah.
not for the Spirit of God, or even understand each other. You know,
Definitely.
I mean,
Yes.
they're just so diverse. And I heard Ed Stetzer. He's not the original person to say this, but he's who I remember saying this: that it's not so much that the church has a mission statement, but that the mission of God, the Missio Dei, has a church.
Yeah.
So it's the mission has a church to accomplish His purposes in the world. The church has to be alive in the Spirit, right? It vivifies the church,
Yes.
and it has to carry the gospel. You know, and when Paul wrote to the church at Thessalonica, he said the gospel is going forth and bearing fruit wherever it goes. Like it's the thing that's bearing fruit in and of itself. This good news that we're heralding. So I'm not saying like the church structure from 11 to 12 o'clock, you know, on Sunday mornings, like
Yeah.
is the hope of the world. Is
Yeah.
it's not less than that, but it's a lot more than that.
For
Um,
sure. For sure.
it's
And I
the
think that's
Spirit.
where like people like me, when I first started hearing that, I came in with a lot of like your very typical, saying typical not to downplay how like honest it is and how it actually hurts, but it's just something a lot of people go through. So very typical church hurt. So
Yeah.
I was very much one of those, yeah, but like
Yeah.
I think I could just do church, you know, in my house with 3 other people. Like I don't need all of this, but like hearing you explain it that way and like just learning your heart on that topic, like over the few years I was there, was just very life changing for me, as the way that I viewed like just the importance of being a part of the body.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a pastor I respect in Austin. He wrote a book called Gospel Centered Discipleship. It's a really good book. And he mentioned, you know, this isn't like 100% theologically correct kind of thing, but he mentioned bobblehead Jesus.
Yeah,
I don't know if you ever heard that term,
I
but
don't think so.
Christ is the head of his body, the church. And so Christ is the head. And you cannot diminish anything from Christ. You know,
Yeah,
He is vindicated. He is risen. He sits at the right hand of the Father. Um, but he was lamenting really that the body can be atrophied like ligaments refusing to be bound together with other ligaments,
Yeah.
muscles completely unused because they're unconnected from the rest of the body, so they can't be used. Like a collection of organs. It's just a miracle, the body's even alive because they refuse to be bound together in one cohesive piece. And how we kind of like, we try to come to church on our own terms, and to be straight up real. I said it earlier on. I don't know if you caught it, that some of my greatest joys and my greatest scars
Yes.
have come within a church structure. And but to submit to one another out of reverence for Jesus Christ, the head,
Yeah.
and to join ourselves to the body, some of which we'd never choose,
Yeah.
because we just like lay down the control. And then to make it worse, this is a key part of what I believe the church to be. Like, we practice radical hospitality to the stranger,
Yeah.
which means the body strengthens and grows with people. I mean, you don't know them. You can't control who this is because it's the stranger, So to lay down the control of, like, I'll have community on my terms,
Yeah.
and when I'm bailing, when I want to bail, that's not God's intention.
Yeah.
The entire New Testament is written to a local church. Like, every
Yeah.
letter was written to a local church. The vision at the end of all this is, you are my people and I'm your God, and there's the multitude around the throne. And there is an urging not to forsake the gathering, especially as the day of the Lord draws near. In Hebrews, there's just a fear that we're caught up in a cultural current, and the church has made it easy
Yeah.
to be caught up in the cultural current of individualism, but it is not a faith that's expressed in the scriptures.
True. That's very good. One of the other topics that I really like to hear from different pastors is, and this goes hand in hand with what you were talking about some of your greatest scars coming from that as well. You see a lot of pastors that go all in really quick, and they constantly pour out and pour out and pour out, and then they burn out. Or you hear it all the time. Some, big name pastor is caught in a financial scandal, or a, cheating on his wife, or that kind of thing. And what precautions do you take to avoid experiencing burnout? I can say from my own point of view, it's been like very trial and error, and like still trying to find that routine and that so just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right about the trial and error thing, and I think what's something that we all need to come to terms with is how we serve and operate out of need,
Yeah.
rather than out of fullness. Like, for me, I was an only child growing up. I got approval whenever I wanted it.
Yeah.
I was it. So I was the best kid because I was the only kid. And so approval wasn't so hard to come by for me. And I had loving parents, and they weren't trying to set me up for this, but kind of growing older and finding identity outside of the home, like, approval was just something that was supposed to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just supposed to get that because I've always gotten that. And so, it formed in me some very much people pleasing tendencies. And the inability to say no, because wanting to please people can make you a workaholic, and it can make you an anxious wreck. And it's done both of those things to me. I would, real talk, my wife is awesome at calling this out, which is literally life-giving.
Yes.
And how we're better together. But I could plan my whole week. This is my term that I like to use. I don't know if it's original to me, but with impression management rather than time management.
Yeah.
When I'm planning out my schedule. So who do I need to impress and please this week, rather than what's the Lord calling me to, and how am I going to structure my week? So I think, first of all, just like being aware of those tendencies, what drives you to operate out of need,
Yeah.
Before we get into the rhythms, like that was critical for me. And it was, my anxiety was fear-based. And so medication wasn't necessary for me in the long run. And so I had to find that fear, and I had to start pulling it up by the roots over a long period of time, by all means necessary, prayer and counseling and community and scripture. And so for, number one, that's one way of, I honestly believe if I had not gone through the valley of panic attacks before pastoring, that I may have been chewed up and spit out already.
Yeah.
I really do, if I hadn't had to face that. But I do know, from being close now, from being a pastor 7 years, like that's all that long, I guess, but and being around other pastors, and seeing some really heartbreaking burnouts and moral failures. I do believe that all of it comes down, because a lot of people say, how could a pastor do fill in the blank?
Yeah.
And the how could for me is a tap out. Like the pressure got too much and they couldn't in good conscience step away on their own volition. So they make a way for others to force them out.
Yeah.
They just can't handle it anymore, and the pressure's too much. And so literally, like, a moral failure is honestly a way in their mind of freedom to get out.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never thought of that, but that makes so much sense. Like,
just one
even
way
if
out.
even if they're not doing that, like if you were to ask them, like, is this why, they would probably tell you no, but like somewhere in there, like, that just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's from being close to a couple situations, and that's, as I'm not speaking with great authority on that.
Yeah.
But I've perceived it, and but so that's the number one thing. But I mean, God in all of his infinite wisdom, to those of you who have had that conversion to community / church, or conversion to mission, um, I think in the spirit of humility, that word keeps coming up. We've got to understand that the giver of the mission knows how to accomplish the mission better than you do.
Mm-hmm.
And when the giver of the mission, he created all that is and then rested on the seventh day, if he believes that that's essential to who he's created you to be and the mission he's called you to, then you are completely rebellious to avoid Sabbath and saying, I know how to do your mission better than you do, God. Like, I know how to do it better than you do. And
that's the part that's trial and error for me, is like figuring
it
out what day that is.
Sure. Yeah. I agree. I think, I'm going to try not to go down this rabbit hole, but I do think that Sunday is tremendously valuable in our worship, because it's a proclamation. The Sabbath used to be Saturday, but now, because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the beginning of a new era in human history, with the risen Christ, like we declare resurrection every time we gather on Sunday. So I think the worship on Sunday, and I'm not saying that you're in sin if you're worshiping on Saturday night or whatever, I'm not saying that at all, but there's a proclamation to the world by worshiping on Sunday. But as far as Sabbath, like for me, 3 p.m. Friday to 3 p.m. Saturday, typically.
Yeah.
Sometimes it shifts 2 hours back. Sometimes there's just this. I'm a campus pastor, so I have a lead pastor, and sometimes there's an obligation for that week, and I have to plan ahead and shift that time of rest and rejuvenation. So I'll say one more thing is that you count when you're held accountable. So you have to have somebody holding you accountable. And I have that structurally. Not everybody does.
Yeah.
So I'm part of a denomination. I go before a district board of ordained ministers every year and interview for my job all over again. So am I fit for ministry? Am I fit for ministry? Yes, the only time of year I wear a suit. But anyway, so I take that, even though sometimes I don't always enjoy it. I take that as my role in this mission must count. You're right. Yeah. I mean, because they want to make sure that I'm fit for ministry. And I have other campus pastors I meet with multiple times a week, and I'm rubbing shoulder to shoulder
Yeah.
with other pastors who do the very same role that I do. And they, they hold you accountable. And we all know it. There's little things that you can do as far as like taking time off, like off,
Yes.
and putting screen limits on your phone, and
Yes.
going to counseling as needed. I mean, there's all those, we all know those things, but unless we're in tune with us operating out of our own need, and unless we have somebody holding us accountable, we'll still, even though we know it, we won't faithfully obey it.
Yeah.
We'll just rebel against it.
I can't remember if you told me this or if you told somebody else this and they told me this, but on this topic, I was talking to somebody, maybe you, about how obviously, like, as you just said, Sundays are awesome. Sundays are, awesome. But for us, that'll never be the day that we just get to like soak it in and just recharge. That's the day that we pour out.
Absolutely.
And I remember you talking about accountability, and at least at that time, you told me, or you said that you met with your accountability partner Mondays, first thing, because as for pastors, and I mean, I've only been doing this for a very short time now, but I fully agree, like, that's when the enemy is going to attack. Like, even for me, like Sunday evenings, Sunday afternoons, like I'll find myself getting grumpy or irritable just because like I've already poured out everything, and like I just need to take time to, let God pour into me. But definitely if that goes unchecked, that's when that'll lead to making bad choices or treating people out of spite, or letting yourself get angry about things that you're not called to be angry about. So that's something else that you've said that really stood out, is making sure you start off your, post church week with that before jumping back into handling people and talking to people and meeting with people and planning for next Sunday. Like, start off with accountability.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So there is a check-in on Monday morning because I'm just at my weakest and most vulnerable, really.
Yeah.
Like I said, after being poured out, I don't think this is exactly what Jesus meant, but I think about it this way. When he talked about casting out demons, and when it's empty, like the enemy wants to come back with friends and fill
Yeah.
it up. What's empty,
Yeah.
fill it up. So it has to be filled with the Spirit of God. Like, it has to be filled with His presence, or else the enemy sees a void to fill. And I know that's not exactly what he meant as far as applying to the situation, but I do think about it that way. Like, you've got to have a time where you're not operating on empty, and you've got to be like recharged and filled up after you pour everything out.
Definitely. And that's something that I know for me, it's hard sometimes, more so when I'm like touring and like traveling. It's hard to like take that time to just turn everything off and just be with God. But I know, to kind of speak to like other pastors or people who are working in churches that like find themselves struggling with those people pleasing tendencies. Like, one of the biggest things that I've had to learn over the past year and a half is like, I can't do anything for anyone else if I don't take care of me.
Yeah.
And like, my old thought, I guess, whether you would want to call it like a religious thought, or if I was just like thinking out of like obligation or like what I had to do, like taking care of me seemed like selfishness.
Wow. Yeah.
But actually, like, learning that I can't do anything else if I don't take care of me, it's been very humbling.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. The enemy wants you to think that selfish, doesn't he?
Exactly.
Because you're susceptible at that point. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, kind of on ending note here, if there's anybody listening to this podcast and they find themselves like struggling with the idea of going to church, or they're having trouble finding a church. I know I've definitely been there in the thought of like I don't need to go to a church to be the church. And then you'll find ways to justify that, whether it's, well, I'm still taking in preaching because I go online and listen to pastor whoever. So I'm still, taking in all the stuff that I would take in at church. So I don't need to go, or just been hurt by the church so bad that you feel like you never want to step foot in there again. I hear that a lot of like, I love Jesus, but I will never go to church again. And so I just want to give you a opportunity to kind of speak into that. I know I just said a lot of things, so just pick the part that you want to speak into.
Sure. I'll start with this because this is where we've been in our community. We're preaching about freedom and the nature of freedom and the things that put us in bondage. And I have met people who've come through our church doors, and some of which have even integrated into our community. And I have no idea how they had the courage to walk back into a church.
Yeah.
Like they're like a hero to me.
Yeah.
Like how, after what you've experienced and what's, how you've been sinned against. Like I'm getting teary-eyed thinking about it. Like that's a remarkable, some people say it's dumb, but I think it's a remarkable act of courage.
Yeah, that's good.
And wow. So I'll say that with churches, you won't find a perfect one. So don't wait on that.
Mm-hmm.
However, if there is evil within the leadership of the church, run.
Yes.
Because there have been wolves inside the flock. That has happened. Some of you have encountered that. So you want to practice discernment. But once you've practiced discernment, don't look for perfection. You look for people who are ready to be perfected, who know they're in process. Don't look for a perfect one, because you're going to find out soon that it's not perfect. But I go back to Jesus's heart. And I'm an old married man, and Josh, you are too now. And like nothing like pricks my heart like speaking about my wife and my bride, and to see the church through, and not through Western individualistic collection of individuals all scattered around. That's just honestly not what's being talked about in the scripture. And but when I see the way that God sees the church, his bride, if I try to look at it through his lens, I see like Ephesians 5, Christ loved the church, gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her. That's an ongoing process by the washing with water and through the word, to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. And I think about just the great lengths that he's gone, like she's been promiscuous at heart, seduced by power, and we're in the political season. Let's just go ahead and name it, right? Seduced by all kinds of ideologies and idolatry, but yet like he won't give up on her, and he won't stop seeking her out, restoring her, bringing her back. And I believe that cynicism and critique, so cynicism's never warranted. Critique is sometimes warranted. But it's also tremendously easier to critique from a distance than to be involved in the restoration.
That's good.
It's messier. It's harder. It'll bring you to tears. You'll get cut. You may get, you'll be bumped into. But the quickest way to revival is first personal and then corporate repentance.
Yeah, definitely.
The quickest way, in my estimation, is humbly like serving within the body. And that's when I experienced conversion. I never understood it until I drove that church van.
Yeah.
And it's just an ordinary, ridiculously menial task. Anybody can drive. Almost anybody can drive if you're of age, and if they don't have any limitations on that. But like, but yet, like serving the stranger who will never pay me back, and serving the stranger for the glory of God, like it changed my heart. So my I mean, really, it's as simple as practice discernment, but don't hold the church to a standard before joining it that you wouldn't want to be put on you before attending. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, like we have been lazy and apathetic. I've seen the climate on social media. We have put our hope, and we've had idolatry with political whatever, this or that.
Yeah.
Like we have been prideful. We have wounded other people. Like we have all done these things.
Yes, for sure.
And we are not unforgivable and irreconcilable. And God doesn't see you that way, and He sure doesn't see His bride that way. So there's the invitations to the difficult path. Let's just name it. It's so much harder to reform and restore than it is to kind of create our box and stay over here.
Yep.
Yep.
That's something that we talk about a lot too, is like very rarely are we called to do the easy thing. Like it's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard. Doing life with other people isn't easy, but it is beautiful. And definitely encouraged in that. Thank you for coming on today. It's been a lot of fun to get to talk with you.
Really has. Enjoyed it.
Since that coffee shop closed, we haven't really gotten to do this. So what better way to do this now other than to hit record and share it?
Yeah. It was like our best friend's basement. I love that coffee shop.
Exactly. It was so much fun. Well, thank you for being on here. And thank you guys for listening to this episode. And we hope and pray that you got encouragement out of this, and whatever God wanted to speak to you through this, we hope that you were open to receiving that.